Good evening, everyone. I'm Dennis Inholson, Chief Learning Officer for the National Art Education Association. Thank you for joining us this evening for this webcast. Really, thank you. We know what you're all going through in these very challenging times, and we appreciate your time and your energies this evening. Thank you. We're using Zoom for webinar this evening. You'll be able to use the chat or the Q&A to ask your questions. Our guests this evening will try to get to all of your questions. So there are a lot of questions, a very exciting topic tonight. Closed captioning is available under live transcript, and this webcast is being recorded and will be available on the NAEA website in just a few days. So let's get started. Creative journeys, career paths, no more starving artists. We've all heard it as art educators. Those kids just can't get jobs. They cannot study art. Well, that's not us. Tonight's Need to Know webcast is sponsored by WACOM tablets. WACOM pen tablets and display give artists and designers of all ages the technology to explore, experiment, and express their creativity. Just what we like, right, art educators? WACOM is sponsoring today's webcast to support art educators and students in your creative journeys and creative opportunities. So let's get started. Two really exciting artists this evening. We have Mike Uwandi. Mike is a concept artist and art director for film, television, and games. He is also a co-founder of 98 Collective, the first Black-owned concept art studio focused on shifting the entertainment landscape by actively working towards more representation and inclusivity. Mike's clients include Marvel Studios, ILM, Disney, Warner Brothers, CBS, Sony, Fox, and more. And more recently, his work with the Mandalorian and Westworld were Emmy nominated for an Outstanding Fantasy Sci-Fi Costumes category. In addition to his work at the 9B Collective, Mike has partnered with Brick Foundation, Compton Alliance, Otis College of Art and Design, and WACOM in the education and in mentorship spaces. I'm excited to hear about the mentorship piece. He focuses on bringing more thoughtful diversity into the creative industry and serves as a mentor for BIPOC artists within and outside the United States. Thanks for joining us, Mike. I'm also pleased to present Christina Diem Pham. Christina is a producer at 9B Collective and in the games industry. At 9B, she oversees areas of content production, and in games, she manages the art part pipeline for WWE 2K22 for visual concepts. Christina's previous projects include leading character production on mobile RPG. I don't understand all that yet, Christina, but I'm anxious to learn. Marvel Strike Force, managing and communications for art and engineering teams at Riot Games, and writing for the .com group, Marvel Entertainment. Christina's work and focus centered around making creative industries more accessible and equitable for current and future generations of visual storytellers. I love that, visual storytellers. Beyond the 9B Collective and the WWE 2K22, Christina produces and co-hosts The People with David and Pham, a radio show turned podcast centered around the Los Angeles stories not covered by the mainstream media. Earlier this year, Christina also developed a one-off book initiative for Sparrow in the Razor Wire for the memoir of Juan Will Win, Who Win. Well, with that, I'm going to turn this over to Christina, stop share, and they will tell their stories this evening. Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Christina.
Hi, everyone.
Hey, everybody.
Thank you so much for joining us today. And as always, Mike, it's always awesome to have these talks with you. And first off, thank you to everyone for joining us. Please ask your questions and we'll answer them at the very end. But just before we dive in, just a few items to just get started. First off, I want to thank the NAEA for having us. And of course, thank you so much to our partners over at WACOM as well for making this possible. Thank you to all the students that are here, all the teachers. We are so excited to talk to all of you, and please chime in the chats. Our moderators are keeping an eye on this. I'm also checking this out as well. So when we get to your questions, we will absolutely try and get to as many of them as possible. And we'll try to keep our segments very short so we can talk to all of you as soon as possible as well. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen quickly. Cool. Okay. All right. So our talk today is called A Quest for Creative Career Paths. Today, you'll hear about the work we do with 9B Collective. Also, you'll hear a little bit about Mike, a little bit about me, as well as our journeys, and also opportunity spaces and putting in the work as well to get jobs. I think a lot of you will be really, really interested in the landscape that's out there right now, and also putting in the work to obtain employment. That's super, super important. Also, we'll talk about how you can get in touch with both 9B and us as well, and we'll have hopefully a ton of time for Q&A. So, whoop, there we go. Let's kick things off. Mike, you want to tell everyone a little bit about 9B?
Yeah. Hey, everybody. So 9B is a company that was pretty much created by me, Phil, and Aldis Hodge. It's the first Black-owned concept art studio, as well as many other things that you guys will soon realize and find out. But we started during COVID, oddly enough, and it was due to a disparity that we noticed in the community, as well as the art community itself, where we saw that there were people of color who weren't working in the industry. And us being in position to be able to help mentor and supply certain jobs, we wanted to kind of help develop the industry as a whole, because we noticed, for one, outside of the fact that a lot of minorities may not get the work that they may be looking for, as far as especially higher end jobs. One of the big things we noticed was, as the culture is shifting towards specificity, we also need people who are in position and understand those cultural nuances to be in the place to create and push the narrative and make these things feel a little bit more real, a little bit more palpable. If you look at films during the 90s and even early 2000s, they were kind of rough. So we really wanted to put people in positions who knew better, and so they could do better, and also offer mentorship and giving people a chance to flourish in their career. A lot of the times when it comes to the BIPOC community, it's often not what you, like how good you are, the potential, it's more so what you've done, unfortunately. And so we kind of want to change that, because we see so many amazing artists who just never got a chance. And so that's one of the big things that we really want to help with 9B, but also helping future generations as well. As mentioned before, we noticed there's a lot of times in schools, kids will be drawing when they're young, right? And then it just drops off. And we want to kind of fix that pipeline as to figuring out why. And so a lot of the times it's lack of education amongst the parents. Sometimes it's lack of motivation, but also it's the unfortunate lack of representation. So we really want to help push that and kind of encourage a future generation to get into the industry, and that way it'll create a lot more balanced workforce overall.
Yeah, and looking here, you'll see that over here to the left is Mike, the middle is Phil, and to the right is Aldis. And our team itself, while we have, I believe, upwards of 60 BIPOC artists around the globe, here is our core team. We're missing 2 people from this photo because this is the last time we got together. Most of our team has been operating remote. So this is the majority of our core team here. We're missing 2 members. So yeah. All right, Mike, let's get right into it.
Yeah.
A little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so as you guys can see, my name is Mike Uwandi, of Nigerian descent, raised in South Central California. As you can see, I was starting off as a pre-med student, thought that was the way, because as a lot of us know, you can only be a doctor or lawyer, maybe engineer. But luckily I had really great people around me who kind of helped push me towards what I really wanted to do. Helped remind me, actually. I used to draw since I was a kid, like literally since the age of 3, where I would kind of create these stories and make these characters that I thought were so cool. And looking back, maybe they weren't. But you know, I took about a 10-year hiatus from drawing altogether, and focused more on like buying clothes and kind of putting cool outfits together and going out and doing all the things that, you know, I'm glad I did do, because it ultimately informed my art. And eventually going to Academy of Art in San Francisco for about a year and a half, and then came to Art Center, where I got into the entertainment arts program, and started working around my 6th term. I've worked for certain clients, such as Sony, Marvel, which I'm currently at now, CBS, a few video games, commercials, TV, the like. So I've kind of worked across the board, doing different things before I even got into film. Like I said, worked in commercials, which is a totally different mood. Doing things like Lysol commercials even. It was, hey, that's money, okay? It gave me a lot of money. But working in things like Mattel and working on Barbie TV shows, stuff like that. So before I even got here, there was a long journey to getting here, but I'm happy that I went through that pipeline, because eventually I got to understand a lot more things before getting to this position where I now, outside of just doing concept art, I also art direct. And so I would say that the balance that that's provided, or the past provided, was I'm able to kind of understand at least a little bit of everything and kind of help lead a team and push them towards the direction that needs to be said, but also understanding what the client's needs are, because of so many different personalities that I've had to deal with. So many different personalities I've had to deal with. I'm just kind of obtained the ability to kind of read my client a lot better and kind of convey that information to my team.
And also just a heads up that most of the artwork you'll see in this presentation today is done by Mike. So including most of them, not all of them, including the next 3 that you'll see. So here, Mike, you want to walk folks through, I guess, what they're seeing?
Yeah, no, that was from Mandalorian season 2, designing Ahsoka Tano. One of the later jobs before Marvel that I had. It was a really interesting process. It was very quick work, very fun work, because I am a Star Wars fan to the core. And so it was really cool to finally get that type of job and really push it and, you know, eventually get to where I want to get to. Most of these were done on my iPad, oddly enough. So it was I think the last job where my iPad was able to kind of keep up with my workflow. Nowadays, I can't use that for anything, but yeah, that's pretty much the gist of that one. And then these were for Picard. So these were I think it's my 2nd job in the film industry. And it was really fun because prior to that, I've been working in games, and also I think we were working in mobile games together, me and Christina. And I always felt like I wasn't able to tap into what I actually wanted to do. And so when I got onto this job, I just felt like it was a match made in heaven, because I finally got to go all out essentially and just have no stylistic holdups. A lot of this was a lot of 3D and painting. Of course, the faces of the actors are photo. But yeah, a lot of ZBrush and things like that. I just really enjoyed this project. And I got to work with someone really cool named Greg Hopwood, who was like someone who actually brought me into the industry in a weird way. I met him during Comic-Con a long time ago, and he was just like the nicest dude ever, and just kind of like gave me some information onto how to get into the industry and stuff like that, where I've been chasing that information down for probably like 3-4 years prior, and no one would ever give it to me. So it was really cool to, when I finally got my real first job working in-house in film, I was working with him. And these are from Supergirl. I worked on Supergirl. I think that was during the same time I was working on Star Trek. If you know anything about me, I'm usually working 3 to 4 jobs at a time. And this was a fun project just because you're taking a character that's been the same for what, like 40 years at least, and kind of just trying to update it. And funny enough, the reason why she's even wearing pants is because it's really cold in the Canada winter. So it was really fun designing this character. And the character to the right is one of my favorite characters. And it was during the time I was a student. But I would say that it was like kind of a breakthrough piece. I was taking a class with Joshua Shaw, very measured class, I would say. And I was really trying to push myself to see where I can get to. And it was the first time I combined it was actually the first time I did like a 3D concept in general. It's a lot of painting more than anything. But I remember like it kind of gave me the confidence to get into the industry overall because I kind of established a process. It established a process for me that I now use quite often. If I'm not fully painting something, then I will use 3D. But so many things I learned from Josh Shaw in general, and it was really cool to just kind of see how helpful that was in general overall.
Cool. Hey, y'all. I know why you're laughing. I know why you're laughing. He's laughing because of this photo with the wrestling photo here. So hi, everyone. I'm Christina, Diem, Pham. I myself was born and raised in the San Gabriel Valley, which is right outside of Los Angeles, in the Temple City, Arcadia area, if any of you are familiar with that. So when I went to school, I had no idea what I wanted to do. So initially I went to community college and went to Pasadena City College to study actually sports medicine or kinesiology. And I very quickly found out that while I wanted to be a sports therapist for sports teams end goal, I wasn't very good at math or science, no matter how hard I would try. So I was kind of at a wall, not knowing what I wanted to do. And all my friends at the time knew what they wanted to do. So I just kind of felt lost. This was back in 2008. And when I first started community college, I went to this FNMTV taping, which stands for Friday Night MTV. They have these different tapings in Hollywood. And I saw a bunch of production crews and camera crews. And I'm like, what are people doing on stage? I just had no idea how to fathom it. And that kind of got me on a path that was very curious about communications, but also communications itself in college can take you on different paths, from PR to journalism to media law, all sorts of paths. So I just picked the bucket of communications, figured out that, hey, I'm actually pretty good at writing, so maybe I'll try out journalism and kind of see how it goes that way. And after I stayed in community college for a couple of years, I transferred over to Cal State Fullerton in SoCal and studied broadcast journalism and focused more on the production side of things there. And during my time there, I thought I was going the traditional news path. Like I wanted to be a producer in news, and you need internships to graduate in most schools. And the news stations were taking forever to get back to me. So I ended up actually getting an internship to be a copywriter over at Marvel Entertainment at the time. And I'm like, yeah, I kind of need an internship to graduate. Let me try this thing out for a little bit. Fast forward a year later, I ended up staying with Marvel as an intern for almost 3 semesters, and it changed the trajectory of my entire career path. And I started as a copywriter. My first full-time job out of college was actually a combination of both a receptionist and a copywriter, because at the time that was the only thing I could get in entertainment. And then on the side, I would be writing for the Marvel.com team. After a little bit of time, I was like, okay, I'm not kind of going where I want to. Let me just try a bunch of things out. And the trend in my own career itself was saying yes to a bunch of different things and just trying it out. And I'm like, if I don't like this, then I'll reassess after a year. Like minimum is give it a year and then I'll figure it out. So I ended up actually starting in game development as an assistant to the art department. And that was how I got my overall start to what I am now as a producer. So when I look at my role as a producer, I am multiple roles. Depending on the project, I'm a production lead. I might be an art producer. It might be a bit broader than art. I might be a creative producer. Production itself, most people ask, a lot of times people are like, what do producers do? So the question is like, what do producers usually not do? At the core of it, we are professional organizers. Our jobs at a foundation, no matter what type of producer you are, you do a lot of organizing, you do a lot of scheduling, coordination, facilitation at the core of it. And how you decide to branch off on that path, it changes. So myself, I've been a very technical producer. I've been a very like project-based producer. I'm through and through an art and or creative producer. My specialties outside of working on art and are building art teams. So building art teams from the ground up, from recruiting and staffing art teams for a project to overall managing them. So a lot of people management, a lot of production planning. And on the other side, it's also a lot of facilitation, conflict management, and I'm basically a pseudo therapist. So while a lot of my work as a producer is very much, all right, as a producer, we are responsible and accountable for making sure that we ship our products or the things that we're working on. At the end of the day, I care more about my team. So while we're working on something, at the end of the day, how's my team doing? How is just checking in? How's everyone doing? How is everyone growing in their crafts, et cetera? So, and my current work itself outside of 9B, where I do production, but also I run our social media with the rest of our team, and we do a lot of community work as well. I work on WWE 2K22, hence this photo here. It is the latest WWE game coming out in March, and my past work was on the mobile RPG Marvel Strike Force. That's where Mike and I met. And I also have worked at Riot Games, Marvel, and The People, which I'll talk about in a bit. So some of the work I'm doing right now, this is WWE 2K22, Marvel Strike Force. As I mentioned, a producer does a whole lot of things. So while this was when I was over at working on this project, and I was a character development producer. So all new characters that would go into this game were under my pipeline. However, we had this really cool opportunity to make an art book. So this was a love letter produced for the artist who put their hearts and souls into this project that was such an awesome thing. And like, that's how Mike and I met. And I think we can attest to how like that was when we were there and our experience there, that's formed a lot of our relationship now and how we've decided to work together moving forward. And also, this is The People with David and Pham. This was my radio show turned podcast that's currently on pause. And this itself was, while I work in career and do these cool things in career, a lot of the important things to both Mike and myself are how we contribute to our community. So this project itself was a need that my co-host David Kim and I found the need. So we identified a need in our community to uplift and amplify the voices that weren't being heard by mainstream media. So we created a radio show surrounding it, and we used to be on air with KPFK, which is KPFK 90.7, which was over in Los Angeles. And yeah, and a few other things about us. Mike, you want to talk a little bit about your community work?
Yeah. So Compton Alliance, Gahona Africa, and Brick Foundation, all things that I've worked for. Compton Alliance is actually fronted by one of my longtime friends, Corey Nash. I've known him since like 5 years old. And he managed to kind of create this organization where he helps a lot of like Hub City schools or Compton-based schools in the area. And also some of the cool things is he also created programs that allow us to go to South Africa and go to schools over there and kind of educate and help kids kind of understand that art is a way out. And so it's not just visual arts, actually. It's not just entertainment art. It's also music. It's also writing, things of that nature. So it was a really cool experience to kind of just go to South Africa and see like the different skills that people were bringing to the table. And most of the time their questions were, how do I get into the industry? What do I need to do? because a lot of the guys are talented, but not knowing how to get in. Vihona Africa is similarly another West African based organization where a lot of African artists pull their work together and enter a contest. And sometimes it could be as many as like 300 artists, and we go through each and every single one of them to kind of go through and see like what skills they're bringing to the table. And sometimes it's comic books, sometimes it's character design, sometimes it's environmental design, things of that nature. And we kind of give a judging system and also kind of leave notes as to what they can improve and, you know, where they're at. And sometimes we even bring some of those people into 9B. And Brick Foundation is led by one of my favorite people in the world, Nicole Hendricks. She started this foundation where it helps inner city youth. One of the cool ones that I was a part of was helping out Inglewood High and bringing like younger kids who were interested in the arts into the fold and kind of looking at the projects that they create and giving them professional advice. And it was really inspiring just seeing the level of creativity that, you know, high schoolers and even younger were bringing to the table. And I was like, damn, I need to set my stuff up. So that's one of those things that I really, really enjoyed. That's kind of what I want to do more of. And we are kind of doing more of that, but we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, and myself, this is pretty straightforward. It is outside of work. I volunteer with local organizations in Los Angeles, and last year I read this really cool book. It's called Spirit on the Razor Wire by Quan Huynh. It's about his experience as an incarcerated man, and I found it extremely awesome. And I partnered with Quan to develop a book initiative to get books into prisons for incarcerated folks. Mike also contributed artwork to this fundraiser that I had. And together we raised a ton of money to get over 1,200 books into every single prison across California, plus a few across the United States. And also to recharge, we do a bunch of different activities and everything. We want to talk more about that later too, because it's very important for us to, while we work, to find that balance and to recharge by not doing a whole lot of work as well.
Yeah.
We are going to start talking about some other things too. And I'm seeing some of your questions come in. So I'm hoping that we will answer some of these questions you have as well. However, the big question, Mike, I want to turn over to you too, is that you went to a traditional art school. However, you're also a huge fan of atelier schools and stuff. So can you talk, by starting off a little bit, can you talk a little bit about the differences there and the pros and cons that you've had with your own experience?
Most definitely. So as Christina noted, I went to traditional art school. I went to Academy of Art, and then I also went to Art Center. But I would say that the majority of my boosts were coming from atelier schools. And the reason why is I feel like you have essentially three options: traditional, atelier, but also you can use YouTube University. But I think a lot of them are in the order of self-driven, right? And so a lot of times you need to understand yourself before making that choice. If you're someone who needs someone to give you an assignment, then choose a traditional route. It'll cost you $200,000, but you can choose that. Atelier, generally you'll find classes around $400 to $700 on average, and then YouTube University, free. So you kind of see like the self mentality is kind of a weird balance where you'll see like, oh yeah, if you're not a self-starter, go the traditional route and pay for it. Or if you're really very much a self-starter, you can go to YouTube. And if you're somewhere in the middle, go to atelier. I think that with traditional, what it really gives you is it gives you a nice foundation. You're kind of going through the whole gamut. And sometimes it's not as focused until you're in your later terms. So that can be 3-4 years, right? Until you're finally starting to do what you really want to do. But in the meantime, you're learning all the basics. You're learning perspective, you're learning figure drawing, you're learning art history, things like that, right? And there is a lot of worth to that. I don't know if it's $200,000 worth, but there's some worth to that. Atelier schools, on the other hand, offer kind of the same thing. The difference is there's different types of atelier schools. There's amazing atelier schools like CDA, and then there's other ones like Jeffrey Watts Academy, right? And I think with like schools like CDA, they're amazing because you can go through the whole thing like a school, like a traditional school. But sometimes you may be there because you don't have the money, right? So with that being said, you're not going to probably take every class, but I think the best part about an atelier is you get to really polish up some of the things that you need to work on more. And you're getting them from really good professionals because these are artists or teachers chosen by artists. So with an atelier, which is my favorite recommendation, I think that it really works well when you are able to recognize and self-reflect on your own skills and mishaps. For example, I know when I was taking an atelier, I treated it like an RPG game, which is I would go and I would say, I'm not going to take this class because I need to work on my perspective more. Well, guess what? I'm going to go and work on my perspective. And then once I take those classes and kind of finesse some of those things, then I'll jump into what I really want to do. And I would treat the cool classes like it was like a dessert. Whereas I'm not going to just jump into it because it's really tempting to jump into these like really cool, like dynamic classes where you're getting cool portfolio images. But I know that it's best to hold off on that stuff and kind of build your foundations because you're not even going to get the most of that class if your foundations are not strong. So whatever you do, you're going to be building based on the foundation that you've already established with anything. So I think with ateliers, that's a really big deal. With YouTube though, there are certain personalities who can really stay in front of a computer and just listen to a YouTube video and follow that YouTube video for hours and hours. I cannot. I have ADD. So I don't have that ability. I give credit to anyone who can, but it takes a different level of discipline to even get into that. I use that as more like supplemental. So it's like, I will use my atelier knowledge and then I will sprinkle a little bit of YouTube on there. And I feel like one of the best parts of all of these things is traditional versus atelier. A lot of times ateliers have people who are currently in the industry. So you're making connections and you're understanding pipelines that work currently. Whereas sometimes with traditional art schools, one of the mishaps is that you'll have older teachers who have really amazing foundations, very high skill levels, but maybe they were in the industry, maybe the generation or two prior. So where you may be getting better art knowledge, you're not always getting better industry knowledge. So the atelier and the traditional schools kind of work best when they're hand in hand. And actually traditional, atelier, and YouTube work best interchangeably. Just make them just kind of do one of those. But I still recommend highly ateliers are something to look at, and understanding that some of the benefits that people do not take advantage of, I have no idea why, is if you're going to pay $800 for a class, stay after class and kind of talk to your teacher and just like ask them the right questions, you know, and don't be shy. I'm saying that as someone who is naturally shy. So definitely do that. And like, you'll start to see how that stuff really helps build up later on. You may not recognize it in time at that time, but in due time, you kind of come to a conclusion where you're like, oh, damn, I remember when this guy said this. I remember when this teacher said that. Kind of builds itself.
Cool. Okay, Mike, I know we have other parts to go through in our presentation, but because this was just originally going to be an open conversation between you and I'm seeing a ton of questions come in already. So to everyone listening, I'm just going to tab through this next thing because it's pretty, I think a lot of you are asking questions that we are going to answer should we go through these things anyway. So I'm going to skip right to the very end, and then we're just going to jump into answering some of these questions for y'all so that we're making good use of your time as well. So before we jump into Q&A, here is how you can get in touch with us. So with 9B Collective, you can find us at 9B Collective, 9bcollective.com, for Mike at Black Bear Uwandi on Instagram, michael-uwandi.com. And for myself, Christina Diem Pham, you can find me at _Christina Pham. You can also find us on LinkedIn. So yeah, we love to chat with folks who are interested in pursuing creative careers, and where we can make time, we absolutely do. So I'm gonna move it straight to Q&A because there are a lot of questions that we will answer anyway. And so all right, let's take it straight here. Yeah, what's up?
The image 2 over.
Yeah, let's talk about this.
This is done by one of my favorite peeps, Anna Rivera. Super spunky, cool artist, has a lot of like potential, can paint her butt off. And she is just like a really good example of like what someone who is like trying to come up in the industry should do. She asks a lot of questions. She's driven, self-motivated, and she also understands that like, hey, sometimes the people you're asking questions are like busy, so you gotta kind of remind them a little bit, right? She does like all the things right. I just can't wait to see like how much she grows in her career. But as you can see right here, like she can paint, like she has skills and a lot of potential. So peep her. Her name is Anna Rivera. She's really dope and she's nice. So that's a thing that we'll probably talk about later.
When we initially made this and we're talking about putting in the work, and Mike, you had talked about also like being really awkward and wanting to ask questions, like this was a very appropriate image for us to put in because putting in the work can feel pretty dang painful sometimes. So this is a very accurate depiction of what it can feel like.
It's so true. It hurts.
Okay. Let's jump right into it very quickly. So one question that someone asked, Mike, is can you talk about what characterizes concept art?
Ooh, well, that's an interesting one. So generally when we think of concept art, we're thinking about entertainment art, right? Even though that's just one part of concept art. Concept art is being able to conceptually solve a problem via drawing, right? And so sometimes you have different avenues that kind of that are connected to concept art. So you have environmental art, literally people who try and solve problems throughout the communities or cities, designing ideas. Then you have things like product design, right? Which is still, once again, kind of solving problems, creating a solution through design. And then with entertainment art, it's the same thing. You're taking, say, a prompt that you get about a character or an environment. It's cold, it's muggy, it's this, and you're coming up with a solution to the problem. One of the things that we see a lot is one of the dangers that people can fall in is you see a lot of information online through like ArtStation and like DeviantArt, if people still use that, and kind of you're inundated with all this information, all these cool visuals. And if you take from that and start designing built on what you see online, a lot of the times the dangers are their design, their final design for their image that you're seeing was to solve a specific problem, as opposed to when you get a job, you're literally built to tackle a very specific problem. So I think the one thing I would just say is like concept art is problem solving through art. That's the best way I can put it. And some of the things that kind of run into that also is like theme park art. People who design rides, that's a concept artist. So there's a lot of different ways you can tie that, but there's so many different forms of conceptual art. Some would even say that graphic design is technically conceptual art because you're literally tackling a problem while designing, answering questions that way. So.
Okay, so there is another good question. So when you were working, I want to make sure I'm asking this question right, James Staples. When you were working, where you were, how did you keep your motivation? Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's an easy question for me. I think there were many things that kind of helped me stay motivated. A lot of times, my biggest one is not doing art for myself, in the sense that my motivation isn't tied to me. So it's usually knowing that, oh, like my little brother who has his own career path, if he sees me working hard, then he's going to eventually understand that. Or, oh, like I don't see many people who look like me in this industry. if I can get to a certain point, now people who do look will say, oh, I can do it too. Like things like that are probably my biggest motivations, and just not allowing myself to fail. If I do, I fail as soon as possible. I think also just not being satisfied with where I'm at. No matter the coolest job I can get, and I'm still like, I can do more. I can do more. I can do more. I'm grateful, but I'm not satisfied. And so I would say that when me and Christina were working together, we worked together at Fox Next Games or whatever, I was happy. I loved my coworkers a lot, but one of the biggest things is I knew that I had more in the tank, and that job wasn't going to give me that. One of my biggest things I want was growth. I wanted to be around other artists who were going to push me and make me better. And also for me to kind of test my upper limits, which is really important to me. You know, you do this thing for your whole life, and to stop short of the work that you put in is kind of a dishonor for me personally, because I've had so many different sacrifices and people who sacrifice for me to just stop halfway. So I would say that those are my biggest motivations. And also just knowing that, like I said, whenever I step into a job, I'm also having to represent other people as well, right? People who may not get these opportunities, and knowing that unfortunately the real stick of it is you get into certain companies, you get into certain spaces, and they oftentimes want to stick to what they're familiar with. So when you go in there and you do a good job, it kind of encourages those companies to bring in more. All of those things are my motivations, is always taking it away from myself. If it was just based on myself, I would have stopped a long time ago, to be honest. So I would have been comfortable, but there's fun in being uncomfortable as well. So
oh yeah, definitely sitting in that discomfort. And on my end, in finding my motivation, a lot of the times earlier on in my career, for sure, I used to pick projects because I'm like, this is a really cool project. And while I still do that to a degree, I very much choose the team that I work with, because while I'm working with a team, we might be on a project that's not super cool, but if you're working with awesome people, it makes the experience way better. So a lot of my motivations as a producer, it stems around I look at it in parallel very much. So like, what is the thing I'm working on, but also like, what kind of team do I have, or sort of potential team can I build? So I'm usually looking at the potential of my own teams, and that's a starting line. There are different things that I absolutely factor in of like, hey, the company's values, what sort of leadership am I working with? Because at the end of the day, usually in my roles, I'm middle management. So if my teams, very much to my experience with Mike, like us working on Marvel Strike Force, my team is awesome. But in order to make that instrumental change, I was still middle management. So in order to make the changes that I wanted to, in order to invest in my team, either whether it meant providing classes for artists to grow, or identifying speakers to come in and talk about art with the art team, leadership absolutely has to support that. And if they aren't, I can only do so much with my job. So at the end of the day, sometimes the motivation might be there, but is the support structure also there? And sometimes it is. And sometimes it is. And for instance, with my own job and role at WWE, or with visual concepts on WWE 2K right now, it absolutely is there. And sometimes it's not, which is when I've chosen to take a step back and ultimately leave projects or leave companies I've worked for.
she's not capping at all. That's why I was laughing, because I'm like, I literally seen her be like, oh, you don't support this? Oh, you guys aren't doing anything for the community? I'm gone. And she'll leave with no second plan. Just be like, I'm out. Just dip out. So she's not.
And it's also not to say like, hey, I will not try to. I will put in the work, and I will absolutely put in the work to provide solutions. Because at the end of the day, if you're complaining and if you're providing feedback or complaining but not providing solutions or alternatives to make a project or a workplace better, then you are also kind of a part of that vicious cycle too. So you definitely try to put in the work and then take a step back when it is time to go. All right, what else? Okay, hold on. There are so many other questions here. Oh my
Hi
goodness.
there, I thought I'd join you for a minute.
Hi, Dennis.
There's so many great questions.
I
You're
was like,
absolutely correct.
yeah, oh my
And
goodness.
I've been kind of grouping some of them together to get to as many as possible. And the two
Yeah.
of them are fantastic. And there's
I've
some
yeah,
themes.
there's some really,
Yeah.
oh, go ahead, Dennis. I was gonna
Go
say there's
ahead.
a really good one.
The
There
one
there
thing I want to make sure we talk about before it's too late, and that is really twofold. One is art educators often aren't trained with using any technologies, and sometimes students aren't either. You know, they're using the traditional art materials in high schools. And when did it enter, especially I think for Mike, when did it enter where you started using things like tablets and some of the software and how did that happen?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. Pretty much my whole life, I've always been traditional based. Even now, I'm still rooted in traditional. But prior, yeah, I would do watercolor, pastel, oil painting, like since I was a kid, like markers, etc. And when I finally got into, when I was engaging the interest of entering the industry, I redlined using traditional for a long time. I just stayed using traditional because I understood that the foundation of digital is traditional. And so I remember, like it was yesterday, trying to, one of my close friends, pretty much like a brother to me, Brandon, gave me a Wacom tablet because I was like, there's no, a Wacom tablet. There's no way I was gonna be able to afford one at the time. And I tried to use it. And there was a part of me that was so stubborn and frustrated with trying to, because I'm like, I know what I can do traditionally, but I can't use this thing. But I kept to it. And one of my friends said, hey, you have to just take your time with it. Just try to use it at least once every day and apply the principles that you learn from traditional into digital. But understand it's almost like learning to write with your right hand. It takes some time. And so even my process now, when I do paint online or digitally, all I'm doing is recreating the same process I use for some of those paintings, like the traditional paintings back there. Just doing what I know. And eventually over time, it got to a point where I remember me and one of my friends was looking at a friend who would use his Wacom tablet and he would be like using his keyboard at the same time without looking. And me and Pham were like, whoa, that's so right. And when I finally got to that point of comfort, she like pointed it out and she was like, did you notice you're not looking at the keyboard? And I was like, oh, that's cool. So it just takes time, but I remember it's really frustrating. It's hard for sure because it's almost like learning a new tool, right? But I think also the thing is recognizing how, like, who are you? What's your identity as an artist? Some people use the tablet, some people use a Cintiq, right? And the Cintiq, because my root is in draftsmanship, like drawing, the Wacom tablet never really vibed with me to the best of my ability. But what I noticed is a lot of like people who are like traditionally like painters, really love using tablets. Whereas for myself and other people who tend to draw a lot, they use Cintiqs. And because I was primarily a sketchbook artist most of my life, the Cintiq is just something that's a lot more comfortable for me. And that was almost like one-to-one for me. Like, oh, I get this. This makes sense.
Thanks.
Mike,
Really,
you'd
I really liked
also,
your comment about small wins, basically trying at least once a day to
Yeah.
try something. I think that's really helpful. The other thing is a lot of people say in my generation are sort of afraid of it, think we're going to break the technology, like it's so fragile, which we know isn't true. Students tell us that all the time. The other thing I want to make sure we get in, which I heard throughout, and especially for Christina, sort of the pseudo counselor you are, talked a lot about supporting your team. And I've also heard throughout your conversation is really the new skills that you picked up after college, after the atelier school, things like working in teams, meeting deadlines, working hard, collaborating. Christina, could you elaborate on those kinds of skills in addition to the technical skills?
yeah, absolutely. So on my side, at least, like I feel so a lot of the skills I have, they were definitely there as a kid, except I didn't know, like I was pretty organized as a kid, like back to school shopping was my favorite time of year, like getting new school supplies, and just like that foundation was there as a kid, and I didn't really recognize it until later. So the overall looking at my own role as a producer, like there's the overall organization side of how I'm setting up my own systems and processes and what tools I'm using to set my team up for success, like specific tools like, hey, am I using things like ShotGrid or Jira, Atlassian, or different project management systems, more or less, and like things like Slack, like how are my teams talking? So those are the things that come with any job, and depending on the job, it is different. However, I think a lot of those going into these jobs, those things are learnable. They're absolutely learnable, and depending on the places you go to, you just kind of learn a new, it's like learning it, it's like just muscle memory. However, there are skills that I believe are much harder to learn, and specifically when it comes to how I look at my role as a producer, like I consider myself a very team-oriented producer because, as I mentioned earlier, while I understand we're all on deadlines and I have expectations for my artists to hit and to be able to manage their own times, I understand also that not every artist is naturally good at that. So my job as a producer is to help them understand how to get better at it. So that's where I come in to help set up systems, like the systems or basically the structure to help them succeed. So if you take Mike, for instance, Mike at any given point will have 4 to 5 jobs. And one of the things we have coming up is Mike is like, I feel a little bit overwhelmed with how to manage my time. And I'm like, okay, dude, let's take a seat and sit down, see what you've got on your plate, period. And people are pulling him in all sorts of directions with like multiple projects with multiple companies at this point. And so a simple thing that I might do on my end is like, hey, you need to be able to book out your own schedules and tell people when you're available so that you know when to book. And that system that might be in place is like setting up like an automatic scheduler, like a Calendly, so people know when to book him, so that he sets those boundaries with his employers, but also for them to understand the expectations of how to respect his time so that they have that partnership. And it's not like I get Mike's time whenever I want to. And granted, I'm doing this because I care about Mike and he's my friend. However, but because I've also been his producer in the past, I understand how he works and I understand how, like, what might be his breaking point as well. And at the end of the day, again, as producer, I look out for my team. So in very specific scenarios, you mentioned the term pseudo-therapist, and while we're all working on these different projects, people also have, I know you brought up 1.2, Dennis, it's like people also have lives outside of their jobs. And especially right now, you don't know what's going on with people because a lot of our interactions are on Zoom at the moment. People are going through a lot of stuff that they might not be showing, but it's understanding, it's one, getting to know your team and your teammates beyond what they do for work. So who is Mike beyond an artist, and understanding that and understanding what motivates him under the hood pretty much. And it's those little those tools, but just talking to people and getting to know people that you work with. Over time, you build those skills. And over time, those skills are one thing, but ultimately you build that trust and respect. And at the end of the day, it comes to respect. So if I'm working with a team that doesn't know me and I'm just coming in, how am I going to build that respect so that my team knows that they can trust me in times of, we've got to meet this deadline, through, oh no, I'm going through a personal loss. Can I talk to my producer about this and be completely open with what I'm actually going through up here, as opposed to what I need to deliver as an employee? So
yeah, that's really beautiful, Christina. You could be on our team anytime you like. I'm guessing Mike needs you now and then with all of his projects. In fact, you led right into another question I have about how you handle all the spinning plates and all of the different projects. I've heard that throughout our questions, and I'm trying to cluster these so we can answer more than one person at a time with the same kind of question. If you can imagine, probably thousands, tens of thousands of students out there right now, their junior and their senior year, they're thinking about, you know, what are they going to do? They might be those art kids, you know, that want to get in the business. And sometimes, as you know, there's pressures from families not to go into art. So what are some tips that we can provide those students and their teachers there tonight about, you know, hanging in there and proving to their parents you can make a living and those kinds of things? Any ideas for them?
Yeah, I think there's quite a few. One of the things is I would use that as motivation. I know I did, for sure. You know, my dad was like, he was so content on me since I was five. It was like, you are going to be a doctor. And I was so sure that I wanted to be an artist, but over time, you know, hearing that from the outside, you start to be like, maybe I do want to be a doctor. And it was something that was interesting for sure. But understanding who knows who most, me, or does my dad know me better than I know myself, right? And luckily, like I said, I have an amazing mom who kind of gave me her blessing and was really supportive. One of my closest people, like I said, Paloma, helped me like push through a lot with my art stuff. And I had just the best support anyone could possibly have, considering what I was going through. And understanding that my dad, who comes from Nigeria, has a very limited scope. And, you know, he's like 70. He has a limited scope of what success means. So for myself, one of the big things was to educate. So I couldn't educate my dad, but I was able to educate my mom, which she can then communicate with my dad better than I could. That's number one, because I think a lot of the unfortunate like beliefs is, oh, well, if you're going to be an artist, you're going to be professionally poor, right? And it's like, no, artists can and do make a lot of money. There's a range, right? Depends on the type of art you're going into, depends on how much effort you put into your craft, also depends on how much you sell yourself. And selling yourself doesn't just mean selling yourself online. And you know, you can eventually make as much as a doctor if you get really good. So I remember over time, like my dad was like, okay, just don't be poor, basically is what he said. But when he asked me, I think like years later about he was like, how much are you making an hour? And I told him, and he was like, oh, to think that I was not supporting you this whole time. It's like, yeah, to think, right? And you don't get in it for the money, because that could be dangerous too. I think that depending on your motivations, you cap yourself, right? So if your whole thing is, I want to be famous, you usually are going to slow down and stop growing at that point. If your thing is, I want to make a lot of money, well, guess what? Your motivation is going to drop because that's what you are looking forward to. But I think like educating your parents is really important, and also providing them or helping them understand is number one. And then taking that and saying, well, since you think that I'm going to fail and end up back in my mama's house, I'm going to show you that I'm not, right? And so you put in that little extra effort. I think that all things bad can actually be turned into a good if you use it properly, and using it as fuel. And I think that that's one of those things, at least for myself, where it was like, if I took an L, I'm not going to stay down because I'm like, I don't want to hear my dad's mouth. So I think that that's one of those things. And also I think like having a plan helps inform your parents a lot more. Sometimes when people think of artists, they think that we're like kind of wafting with the wind and just like moving where the wind tells us. But at least for myself, I had a very specific plan, dates, the whole gamut. So when they saw that I had a plan, remember both of my parents were like, okay, I trust you, because there was a plan in order. There was no like, I'm gonna just cross that bridge when I get to it. You know, like I don't plan out every single thing, but I plan out the beats. And so
Mike and Christina, I'm sure they saw hard work and perseverance in you too. I'm positive of that, because that rang throughout your whole conversation today. also, there's the technical side, and we have tons of those questions. And we know that our students are going to have to use technologies like Wacom tablets and others to really pursue their career in art, but also those people skills to be old fashioned, right? Those things that we need to know how to do. We have to wrap up. Do you have any final words? And then we're going to share a few things about Wacom tablets and about NAEA, and we'll move on. But man, we could do this all night long. We can't, but we'd like to. So I apologize to everybody out there with all those questions. They're great questions, but here we go. Any final words from the two of you?
Yeah, I do want to touch on one point because Mike, you had talked about how you're like, yeah, sometimes artists go into the career thinking like, I want to be famous, or the motivations are more surface level than internal. So Mike and I talk a lot about this because for instance, when we both hire, whether it's Mike reviewing portfolios or myself like interviewing and hiring and building teams, we're absolutely looking at your capabilities as an artist or whatever you're interviewing for, but also we want to understand the motivation of why you're doing what you're doing. So at the end of the day, you might be one of the best artists in the world, but if you come in with so much ego and you're putting others down and are not uplifting others in the process too, like chances are we'll probably pass up on you, because if we don't enjoy working with you, chances are the teams we've built might not enjoy working with you either. So we wouldn't want to subject them to that. So it's very much about, Mike, you can expand upon this, but it's also very much about how you are carrying yourself and the type of respect. Like, it's how you're carrying yourself, but how you're treating others in the process. Because the industries we both work in, whether it's games or film and TV, while it might seem really big on the surface, those industries are really, really small. I've run into people I worked with 10 years ago, or even when I had internships in college. So treating people with respect, first and foremost, is what matters. And whether or not you have skills to improve upon as an artist and whatnot, like how you treat people matters. And we always reiterate that because we've worked with some not so great people in the past, and it's made the work experience terrible, but it's also made it so that when they've interviewed with us in the future, we're like, no, like absolutely not. Mike, I don't know if you want to add to that at all.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with that. I feel like some of the best interactions I've had is when people kind of communicate what they want. And for some odd reason, I don't know if everyone else does this, but whenever I'm talking to someone, I always have a plan in mind for them based on what they present or what I can see in them. And so there's like some artists who almost sell themselves short, not just financially, but also like goal when it comes to their goals. And so sometimes you can kind of see like, oh, you have a lot more potential than what you think. Oh, you can be an art director. Oh, you can do that. You can do this. And understanding that a lot of times the industry will try to limit you, but it all comes down to your social skills. And I think that when it comes to that, there's a tie-in that I wanted to finalize with this, is that when it comes to your social skills, it's always important for artists to understand that you don't just have to stay talking to artists. Talk to people who are not artists. Engage in things that are outside of your career for multiple reasons. I always think that it's important to, as an artist especially, learn new skills or have something else that you're into. And when you look at any artist who you really, really, really respect, they always have a side thing that they do. And the reason why, I think, is because when you're doing art, you don't really know how good you are. You can't really see it. Like it's kind of like gaining weight or gaining height. Like you don't know it. Everyone else looks at you and they see it. But when you have something else that's tangible, like say, for example, me and Christina rock climb, when you get good at learning to rock climb, you now understand what it takes to get good at doing art. And especially as a student, you can build these skills in unison where you're learning, oh, I want to learn music. Well, a lot of visual artists are also musicians or have come from music. And it's because they learned to get good at one thing and then they moved it over and applied it to their art. So I think like when it comes to that, when it comes to the social side, you'll understand that there's limitations within the art community as a whole. And sometimes it's best to dig outside of that, learn how to socialize, learn people skills, because that will take you further than your actual skill set would. Your skill set will probably leave you limited, but your people skills will get you pretty far and get you into doors that you would have never been able to get into in the first place.
That's amazing. Yeah, right. I mean, school is one thing, but beyond school and the work and the relationships you build is just really super, super critical. Someone just said, this could have been 2 to 3 hours.
I feel like I'm just warming up, so.
I know.
Well,
yeah.
we're glad you joined us this evening. We're glad to know you, and we're going to stay in touch. I promise you that, because it was fabulous. With that, I think we're going to go ahead and share a few slides and wrap it for this evening. And thanks everyone. Once again, this is going to be recorded and you can watch it again. I just noticed in the chat that an art club together was watching, and out of Washington State was experiencing.
Thank you so much for joining us, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So you want to know who is WACOM. And I just want to say thank you, WACOM, for bringing Mike and Christina to us this evening, for supporting art educators and NAEA. It's fabulous. And we know that our students need these technologies, and we're going to get them in their hands. And through the examples of Christina and Mike and others, this is what we're going to be doing in the future. So WACOM is a global leader in digital pen technology with 40 years of technology research and development. They're in higher education environments and K-12 environments. The products are available for all platforms, Mac PC and Chromebook, and they're reliable, durable. In fact, I heard that from a WACOM person this evening, how durable they are. And there's also free technical support. I put this website in the chat earlier. You can't hyperlink it from this presentation, but you can find them just going to wacom.com. Also, learning new tools is really important. If you think about the art educator and their students of the future and what they're going to have to do, they're going to have to do video editing, motion graphics. I'm well into my career and I'm just now learning video editing, and I'm trying, and I'm going to learn that lesson from Mike and Christina this evening, but keep on learning. But if you think about industrial design and architecture, photographer, game design, fashion, all of those require those technical and those people skills that we learned about tonight. So educator purchases by WACOM and WACOM Intuos and WACOM can include a 90-day subscription to explain everything. Now my story, so many years ago, I think it was 20 years ago or so, myself and 2 friends dressed up as Picasso's 3 musicians. And if you don't know that painting, look it up. So just imagine 3 of us dressed up just like that with cardboard and glue and everything. So we got on stage and we won a costume contest, and we each won a Wacom tablet way back then. So Wacom's been with us a long time. That's when the styluses were connected with a cable, and now I know they're wireless. So they've been around a long time. It's a reliable company, and they're supporting art education and students everywhere. So thank you. If you're not a member of NAEA, please feel free to look into us and join us. We have webinars and webcasts and town halls and leadership training, and of course, conventions, and we host National Art Honor Society. There's so many things, so consider joining NAEA, please. You and the other 17,000 members can get together. When you're a member of NAEA, and if you're in the middle level, junior high, or the high school level, you can establish a National Art Honor Society or the National Junior Art Honor Society. In fact, we learned about that tonight. There was a group out there in their club watching this presentation this evening with their club, which I'm a visual person, so I'm imagining these students in their classroom watching this. This is very exciting. And you can do that too if you join a National Art Honor Society or a National Junior Art Honor Society. Those art kids, they need that club. And I have older children, and both my kids were involved in clubs in high school, and it really helped them socially and emotionally and academically. And finally, we are going to New York, and you can pick your device. You can be in person, you can join virtually or hybrid. So think about joining us in New York City March 3rd through 5th. All of that information is on the internet. You won't believe the program we have in mind for that. Well, that's it for this evening. We're going to stop recording now, and we're going to move on and do some outtakes and have a little conversation. Thanks for joining us, everybody. We had nearly 200 people there tonight and about 50 questions we didn't get to, but we'll do our best next time. And thank you so much. And thank you, WACOM, once again. Good night.